Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to share with you about the plasma cell enrichment and the fish testing for the plasma cell neoplasms. So I have no conflict of interest to declare. So this is my talk, the outline. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about the plasma cell neoplasm and then cytogenetic abnormalities associated with the plasma cell neoplasm, and then the guidelines for the cytogenetic testing. And then, of course, I'm going to focus on the plasma cell enrichment and then the experience from the MD Anderson Cancer Center. So, and then I'm going to talk a kind of a touch base on the CD19 B-cell enrichment. So, plasma cell neoplasm is a group of the disease. The most common one we see is the MGUS, is a monoclonal gammopathy of undetermined significant. And then followed by the plasma cell myeloma. And there's two variants, one called smoldering myeloma, another one is a plasma cell leukemia. Uncommonly, we also see some kind of amyloidosis or the plasma cell cytoma, and others is quite rare. So this is the cases distribution about the monoclonal gammopathy. So based on this one, the MGUS is the most common one, accounting for the 58% of the cases. And others like the plasma cell myeloma, plasma cell cytoma, or the plasma cell leukemia account for maybe 1/4 of the cases. But because at MD Anderson, we are not the primary care center, so most like the patient comes to us is already treated on outside. So either has a refractory or relapsed plasma cell myeloma, or the seek for the clinical trial or the stem cell transplant. So more than 80% of the cases we see in our center is in this category. So plasma cell myeloma, the diagnosis, one is depends on the morphology, another one is depends on the flow cytometry. So for the morphology, it has a kind of low grade, intermediate grade, or the high grade. But the most common thing we see is in this one, the mastocule, the type, is the most common one, is a low grade. And based on the morphology, we cannot tell this is a neoplastic or is a benign plasma cells, because in our bone marrow, they are benign or reactive bone marrow cells. But flow cytometry is going to tell, and you can see here, we gated, so based on the CD138, this is a very important, the marker for the plasma cells, very specific. And then the CD38. So if you gate by these two antibody, you see the population of the plasma cells is here. And the blue is a benign reactive plasma cells. And then the red is our neoplastic or aberrant plasma cells. And the aberrant plasma cells we usually see is has a kind of very low or the negative CD19 expression. So it's on this corner. And it usually has a CD56 expression on the benign we should not see. And then, of course, they can have a negative of CD27 and a CD38. And we often also use another one is a CD1117. This is from the different cases, So this one is also very specific. If you see CD117, you almost can't tell this one is a neoplastic. So for the cytogenetics, so there's one thing is, for the diagnosis sometimes also, because like some of the translocation, like the 414 translocation, 1416 translocation, they involve the IGH, FGFR3, IGH, MAF, is really specific for the plasma cell myeloma. So if you have this one, you are sure this one we are dealing with is a plasma cell myeloma. And of course, the most important one is for the risk stratification and then the staging. So in the revised international score system adopted in the 2015, so that one, the big one, the improve is adopt the cytogenetics, the high risk markers, in here, and then you can see, so like the medium survival for the stage 1, 2, and 3, there's a huge difference, right? So this one is unreached, not reached of the medium overall survival, just 83 months, 43 months. So for the cytogenesis abnormality, you might know, so we have two bigger the major the method to detect. One is by the chromosome analysis, also called conventional cytogenetics. Another one is by the FISH. And you can see the detection rate, by the conventional cytogenetics, that's 1/3 of the cases, because the plasma cells usually don't grow well. They are not dividing in the in vitro culture. So majority of the cases, you're going to get the normal diploid karyotype. And that is from the normal bone marrow cells, not from our plasma cells, okay? And then 90% of the cases, if you do by the FISH, they can detect the abnormalities. And when we have the like abnormal karyotype, I won't say it's not very often, it's extremely common, it's a complex karyotype. The low grade, usually the plasma cells don't grow. Once they grow, they have a complex karyotype, high risk. And then there's two big kind of category about the cytogenesis abnormality. One is for the translocation. This one is often involved the IGH, so it's on the chromosome 14. Another one is a hypertriploidy. It's also very characteristic. So they're often involved in the odd number. So like the trisomy 9, trisomy 11, trisomy 15, they are the most common ones in the plasma cell melanoma. These trisomies are not very common in other neoplasms, especially trisomy 11 and trisomy 15. It's not common in other neoplasms. And then the exception is a chromosome 1, chromosome 13, and then 17. The 13 has an RB1 gene, and then 17 we have a TP53. These are the tumor supervisor gene. So we often see deletion or the monosomy, instead of the gain of the chromosome. So this I just show you one picture about the typical, I would say it's so common, the complex karyotype we see in the plasma cell melanoma. So you see the 11, 14 translocation. This one involved with IGH, CCND1. And then you see the deletion, very common. You see the deletion 13q, that's RB1 gene involved. And then you can see the trisomy, the 15, right? As I said, they are very common. And then of course, the chromosome 1p. So this one is another tumor supervisor gene is also deleted. So this is one is a most common translocations involve the IGH. I would say is more than about 40% of the cases might have an IGH rearrangement. So the most common one is IGH CCND1. This one comprises about 15 to 18% of the cases, and then followed by the IGH FGFR3. So this one is about 15% of the cases. So followed by the CMAF or the others, So I also put the primary here. So this is also important, So this is a 5 primary translocations. They are enough sufficient to cause the plasma cell neoplasm. And then they are usually mutually exclusive. Means if you have IGH CCND1, you are not going to see IGH FGFR3. So there's one, at least here is a make rearrangement. So this one is usually a secondary. It's a kind of a company with other the translocations. So and then here, so you say the cytogenesis abnormalities associated with the inferior outcome. The table is trying to show you the sensitivity about the detection of the abnormality. So one is by the chromosome analysis, another one is by the FISH. And you can see, so like the TP53 deletion or this the 1p deletion, 1q gain. So the FISH is detected much higher the frequency, right? And then for the 14 translocation, 14-16 translocation, these two are very important and high risk. And they are often predicted by the chromosome analysis, but they're only detected by the FISH. So the FISH is so important. So on the MD Anderson, we developed for the 8 fish test in a, we call it the myeloma panel. So the top 4, they are high risk. So like the target TP53 deletion, we want to see IGH, FGFR3, the fusion or rearrangement, IGH, MAP rearrangement, or the MYC rearrangement. So, and then the others, you know, so just multi-numerical change for the 1P deletion and 1Q gain. And then we have an IGH CCND1, and RB1 gene is one of the most common abnormality seen in the myeloma, account for 50% of the cases. And the trisomy 9, usually we say is for the hyperdiploidy. So they covered for almost all the aspect. So, and also we has clinical the management implication, like we use the protease inhibitor to treat the patient, which IGH, FGFR3 rearrangement, and we have the BCL2 inhibitor to treat the patient with IGH CCND1 rearrangement. So this is a quite kind of important, and this one is a clinical trial we are going on in our lab. So this is a for the American College of Medical Genetics ACM, which is a guideline for the cytogenetic test for the plasma cell neoplasms. So I just highlight a few the keywords. So first one is a fish, right? So fish, we have to suggest for the enriched for CD138 the cells, enrich the cells, and then the determined by the flow cytometry for the cutoff. So I'm going to tell you what we have in the MD Anderson. You know, we test almost 1,000 cases right now. So it's quite important, you know, what kind of cases you want to do and what cases you don't need to do it. So for the enrichment, you know, so commonly there's 2 major ways. One is for the CD138 magnet the bits. So this one we call it the rubber cell, is pronounced the stem cell the company. Another one is a flow cytometry sorting by the CD138 the positive cells. So compared to the flow cytometry, I think for the cytogenesis lab, this one is very, very easy to kind of implant, and then easy to run the test. I think it's also cheap. So for the enrichment of the plasma cells, I'm going to call it the EPC. So the background is almost all the plasma cells has a CD138 expression, so we can use an antibody to kind of combine for this antigen. And then more than 60% of the cases has a low level involvement. So in these such cases, when we do on the fish by smear or on the culture cells, usually may give you a false negative result. And of course, as I mentioned before, the plasma cells usually don't grow well on the in vitro culture. So by the in vitro of the plasma cells, the purpose can increase the sensitivity of detecting the myeloma-associated cytogenesis abnormality by fish, and it can enable us to detect the subclones. Sometimes the subclone is so important, you know. So when the patient on the treatment and then the relapse, sometimes it's a subclone, you know, so the come up. And then can monitor for the clonal evolution, and can monitor the residual disease because it's very sensitive after the enrichment. So this is a kind of the typical bone marrow smear we see, you know. So we have a like a it's a crocodile or it's a pond of all the fish, you know. So that has the usual size, the neutrophils or the megakaryocytes, and then this is one is our targeting plasma cells. Many of the cases, I think we have a half of the cases is have a lower plasma cells in the bone marrow. And then our goal is to see, this is a one after enrichment, we got maybe 90 or 95% of the cells are the plasma cells. So with this purity, it's so easy for fish to detect all the myeloma associated with the abnormalities. So the mechanism is by the rubber cell. So you have this is a magnetic beads, the microbeads, you know, is a magnet. And then you have a CD138, the antibody, and then plasma cells has one CD138, the antigen expressed on the surface. So you have the mix together and enable the plasma cells. And then now you put the tube in the make the environment with the magnetic environment. So the cells without labeling of the microbeads, they are going to fall through, and then we can collect the lactic the cells, right? So now the plasma cells, because of the magnetic, so they are going to stay in the tube. So after you wash out the non-plasma cells, now you just move the tube away from the magnetic stack. And then now you elute out of the plasma cells, and then they become so pure of the plasma cells. So the procedure we do like in the MD Anderson. So first the first day we receive the bone marrow, we checked for the cell count. This is important, you know, if it's a like the bone marrow is so hypocellular, we may be failed of the enrichment. So check the cell count is so important. And then on the next day, the flow cytometry is out and the bone marrow diff is out, and then we check the result. So that is the kind of triage we do by the daily basis every day. So when the just by the flow cytometry, if the aberrant plasma cells is less than 0.05%, take a look, it's really, really low, you know, by the of the total cells by flow cytometry, or you have an aberrant plasma cells out of total plasma cells if it's lower than 25%, or if you have a very hypocellular the bone marrow. So this is one we usually kind of cancel the fish. And then on the other hand, if you have a higher involvement of the plasma cells, for example, you have a more than 10% of the plasma cells by the total cells by flow, or by diff, you have a greater than 30%, or you have a cell count is high. This is add, okay, 3 conditions you have to all meet. Now you just do the fish on the culture cells, or you can do on the smear. Either way is fine. And for the all other cases, we run for the enrichment, and we do the fish on the enrichment samples. So this one, I think Eva is going to tell more kind of in detail. So I just go quickly. So the first step is for the sample preparation. So this one is we do the filter for all the specimen, like sometimes it has a bone marrow clot. We want to kind of filter out. And then we add the RBC, the red blood cells, lysis buffer to remove the red blood cells. And then this is a machine, you know, they are tiny and does not occupy so big place. So all the lab can have 1 or 2 instruments in the lab. It's so convenient. And it's so easy to run the assay. It's almost automatic. You know, you put your reagent, you sample in, and then you get the result out. And then post for the treatment. So for our lab, we usually, especially in the early stage, you know, I asked our technologist to prepare a cytoskin slice for me to check for the morphology. So that's one I can estimate about the yield and the purity of the plasma cells. And in the same time, they just do the fixation, you know. So after fix, this one they can drop, and then for the fish. And then I just give you one example we did, you know. So this is one is a patient has a 2% of the plasma cells on the bone marrow by the diff. And then by the flow cytometry, the neoplastic cells just 0.57%. It's quite low. And then you can see, you know, after the enrichment, you know, so it's just really, really pure of the plasma cells. And then when we run the fish, you know, we have like 4 fish probes to find the abnormality. So the first one is we run, this one is on the chromosome 1P, this one is on the chromosome 1Q, this is oncogene, CKS1B, and the CDKN2C is a tumor suppressor gene. So you can see, you know, so if you have a 2 red, 2 green, that is a normal singular pattern, only 2% of the cells. And then when you have the singular pattern have a 3 red and 1 green. So that means you lost 1 copy of the CDKN2C. This is a tumor suppressor gene, right? So easily get lost. And then you can gain this oncogene, CKS1B. So, and then there is a subclone that has maybe 20% of the cells. So has a 5 copies, you know, and then now the CKS1B and more gain the attention because they also feel when it has a copy, more than 5 copies, they are really bad, associated with the bad prognosis. So this is one is for the RB1 gene, and you can see, if you see the two red, two green, that means it's normal. And then if you see one red, one green, that is a monosomy. So you lost because the RB1 gene is very close to the centromere, and then 13q34 is very close to the telemetric. So if both is deleted, that is a monosomy 13. And then most commonly we see is a one red, two green. That means it's RB1 gene deletion is more common. So this is what we use is IGH, FGFR3 is a fusion probe. So the green is IGH and the red is FGFR3. So basically if you see two red, two green, that's normal. And then you see two fusions, that is yellow signal is here. So that is a typical pattern for the IGH, FGFR3 rearrangement. Also, we detect in the 95% of the cells. And then the last one is for the MAPE. We use a break apart fish probe. So the normal is we see two yellow fusion signal, and then when the split, red and then green signal split, that is for the positive for the rearrangement. And you can see this one is for the 45% of the cells, and you can tell this is a subclone, right? So So, I mean, in the beginning, when we do the also do the validation, we did kind of 8 cases, 7 with the aberrant the plasma cells, and 1 is negative. And then I can show you the result. We have just 2 pages. So you can see, almost all the cases, if it has an aberrant, no matter is even lower than 0.04%. We detect abnormality, it's a 4 fish probe show abnormality, but in the if you do the culture cells, we say all the normal. This is another case, so also not normal. And then even though, if you see both the abnormality by the culture cells or the EPC, and then EPC give you a much higher the percentage of the abnormality, right? This is so important sometimes for the subclone. So if it's so low, you might not see, like in this one, right? So even though we count for the 1.5, but it's below our the cutoff, we have to call this is negative result, So it's very important to detect in the high percentage. We know this is true, right? So this is the one we run side by side. So we just kind of summary of the 2 tables, We run 8 cases and then 5 cases, so the abnormal fish result on both culture cells and the enriched specimen, but in a much higher percentage. And then there's 2 cases only show the abnormality in the enriched sample, not in the culture cells. And then we can't detect in the 0.04% of the specimen, we still can't tell the abnormality. So that is a because that is doing all the initial validation. So we run both the fish side by side because we want to run on the culture cells. So we select relatively higher of the plasma cells. So that is this one is during the past 14 months we run 815 cases of the plasma cell, the myeloma fish panels. So we have only 16% of the cases we performed on the culture or on the smears, but 84% of the cases we performed on the enrichment cells. So I just explain, many of patient is already treated on outside. So when the patient come to us is on a low level, but if it's you are in the primary care the facility, you might get a higher percentage of the cases has a higher enrollment. So this is kind of just a dissection, for the by the bone marrow, the plasma cell by the deep. And then also I did by the flow cytometry, So I just highlight, this is kind of the group is really unlikely if you do on the smear, you're not going to get the positive result, So this is one account for the 50% of the cases. Another 17% of the cases has a bone marrow dip around 6 to 10%. This is also maybe dangerous, maybe you miss, and at least some subclone you are not going to detect. And then there's another 5% of the cases that has a very poor aspiration. We even didn't do the dip, so this one by smear or by the culture, if you don't enrich or concentrate it, you're not going to get it. So overall, you may have a 72% of the cases might fail or get a false negative FISH result without the enrichment of the EPC. So this is true, after we adapt successfully of the EPC in our lab, our volume is dramatically increased. The clinician bring more cases to the clinical. So it's very, very helpful for us. So this is on the by the flow cytometry, this is neoplastic cells. You can see, so this is a kind of group I also feel is almost kind of dangerous or unable to detect by the FISH without the EPC. So we have a 687 cases, only 19 cases gave us a all normal result, and then 3%, just kind of for 3%. And then 97% of the cases that show at least one abnormalities. It's kind of higher than the reported ones. So it's very, very successful, and then now it's very stable in the lab. So I just kind of give you maybe a little bit about the common reason for the failure or the low yield. So the reason for the failure, so you say the first one is a low cell count. So if it has a lower than 3,000 or the plasma cells lower than 1%, the EPC is not recommended. So usually maybe you cannot have a failed or have a kind of low yield. And then the low percentage of the neoplastic species out of the total the plasma cells, if it's lower than 25%, or you're also not recommended to do the enrichment. And then the reason could cause the low yield, the first one is a bone marrow stored longer than 72 hours. But I don't think you need to worry about it so much. So we do for the weekdays, Monday to Friday, we run is usually is kind of 24 hours. But if the specimen received on Friday, we have to wait for the for the next Monday. So 72 hours seems also okay. Maybe still you can get maybe 80 to 90% of the plasma cells out. It's okay. And another one is a kind of a separation cheat. This is one I think is important, so I recommend it every time when you receive the new lot, you need to do the lot test, so just this week we did one, this is a new lot. You can see beautiful plasma cells, and then this is the lot we are using right now. So you see one kind of neutrophils. So but the purity is still great, 95%. It's really, really good. So and then I just use a little bit of touch base about the CD19. So of course the background is all the B cells has a surface CD19 expression. So we can use a CD19 antibody to pull out the CD19 cells. So like all the B cell lymphomas. And of course, so the same reason, sometimes we got the cases which has a very low the B cell lymphoma involving the bone marrow or the peripheral blood. We need to do the enrichment. And the low-grade B cell lymphoma usually also don't grow well in the vitro culture. And then the purpose is kind of we increase the FISH sensitivity. It's the same as we do the plasma cell enrichment. So for the cases in the plasma cells, we use the minimal is 0.05%. But for the lymphoma, we use 0.5% to 30% as a cutoff. Because we found, maybe because in the bone marrow, we can have many of the benign B cells and then the hematogons, So if you say so low of the CD19 cells, they pull out lots of the non-specific or the benign B cells. So we use a little bit higher of the neoplastic B cells. So this is kind of show you one example of the enrichment. So before the enrichment, the CL cells is 21%, but after the enrichment, I think it's greater than 95%. You know, we just kind of whole field, we just see only one neutrophils. All of them is lymphocytes. And I also have say, this is one is also when we do the validation, we did the in parallel, the fish on the culture cells, and then the fish on the CD19 enriched cells. You know, so even though we also use a kind of a relatively high of the percentage, you know, so even though you see the abnormality on the culture cells, but on the enriched CD19 cells, they are much higher, you know, all of them. So we did the mantle cell lymphoma, we did the CLL, and then diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. So like the MYC rearrangement, you know, the cutoff for us is 4.7%. So this is really on the borderline, you know, if you don't do the enrichment, but if you do the enrichment, it's a 58, is give you a much kind of for sure the you know, the possible result. So I give you the kind of summary. So the first one is the Robocept, the CD138 positive selection is a easy and very efficient method to enrich the plasma cells or the lymphoma, B-cell lymphoma cells. And the enrichment greatly improves the fish sensitivity of detecting myeloma-related cytogenesis abnormalities. And then, of course, you know, the accurate detection of the cytogenesis abnormality is essential for a appropriate myeloma staging, risk stratification, and then patient management. So I would like to thanks for the this one is Oma from the STEMCELL. He's really greatly helpful for us. You know, this is very kind, very nice, and very helpful. And then this is our the team in the MD Anderson. We have Alex, Andy, and then Shiba, and then Chia. So they perform the enrichment every day. So thank you so much. And then I'm gonna stop here.